Mesdames et messieurs, je vous invite à reprendre vos places. Please take your seats as I get ready to introduce our next plenary. I'm happy to see you took my comment to heart when I talked about the offline conversations and the side conversations being just as important as the conversations here on stage. Merci. Bienvenue à vous ici à Victoria. Welcome to everyone joining us online by Zoom for our next plenary on bridging divides with a focus on the environment and climate change. Nous avons un panel impressionnant pour parler de cet enjeu clé qu'est l'environnement et le changement climatique. Et pour modérer cette session, on a Don Schaefer de UBC, de l'Université de Colombie-Britannique. Don is a veteran broadcaster and podcaster, and we couldn't think of a better moderator for this session since he focuses on how we talk about climate change and the environment. So let me introduce Don Shafer and the rest of the panel as they take their seat on stage. Ça me fait plaisir de présenter ce panel et puis notre modérateur, Don Shafer. Don, over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. I've decided, since we were meeting in the green room, that I should throw away all my questions and start from scratch. I won't do that, but it is such an honor and a pleasure to actually not be on Zoom and be in person with this incredible panel. I wanted to thank Chief Gary Sam's heartfelt welcome yesterday. What a way to begin the Victoria Forum. Also, I'd like to note that this is a live as well as virtual event and acknowledge the lands where you live, work, and play. This morning's conversation will analyze our quest to shift our relationship with the natural world from extractive to regenerative by bridging environmental divides and exploring the many conversational ecosystems that come along with them. We all have our own views, our values, and our beliefs of the world and how it should shake out and what it should be. The purpose of this conversation is to try and shift those a little bit. I was struck by the panel yesterday. One of my takeaways was that it appears that we've built more walls than bridges. And this morning's conversation, the first panel, I think I heard them say that. We have, in fact, built more bridges, or we've built more walls. So it'll be an interesting conversation that we have as we tackle some of these difficult ecosystems. I'd like to introduce our panel. Senator Rosa Galvez is originally from Peru and one of Canada's leading experts in pollution control and its effect on human health. She has a PhD in environmental engineering from McGill University and has been a professor at the University of Laval since 1994. She specializes in water and soil decontamination, waste management and residues, and environmental impact and risk assessment. Senator Galvez is a member of the Order of Quebec and Canadian Society for Civil Engineering. Senator Galvez was appointed to the Senate of Canada on December 2016. Kresse Wesling is a Canadian-born, Kent-based, multi-award-winning environmental entrepreneur and young global leader with a background in venture capital and significant startup experience. She's also looking for partnerships in Canada. So we'll talk about that later. Kresse founded her first business, an environmental packaging alternatives company, in 2002 and has helped to build two other sustainable businesses. Kresse and her partner, James Henrit, had a chance encounter with the London Fire Brigade, where they learned that all of London's damaged and decommissioned fire hoses were destined for landfill, so they created Elvis and Kresse. and now turn fire hoses into luxury handbags and donate 50% of all profits to charitable organizations. Kresse has served as a social enterprise ambassador for the UK government and as a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. Balgis Osman Elasha is a climate change and green growth expert with the African Development Bank. She was a lead author of the UN's IPCC reports and was among a select few to represent the group in 2007. In Oslo to receive the Nobel Peace Prize next to Al Gore. The following year, she was awarded the UN's Champions of the Earth Prize. Balgis holds a PhD in forestry science, master in environmental science, and a Bachelor of Science with honors in forestry and agricultural science. She has more than 17 years' experience in different climate change issues with special focus on vulnerability and adaptation assessment related to African countries and the Middle East. She began her climate change work as a researcher in the Climate Change Unit at Sudan's Higher Council for Environment and Natural Resources. The U.S. State Department invited her to the United States in 2008 to take part in a science diplomacy program where she gave lectures on climate change at several American universities. Wendy Smith is a Harvard-educated, award-winning academic and the Dana J. Johnson Professor of Management and Faculty, Director of the Women's Leadership Initiative at the University of Delaware. She is an expert on organizational paradoxes, exploring how leaders and individuals effectively respond to contradictory yet interdependent demands. She studies how organizations and their leaders explore new possibilities while exploiting existing competencies and how social enterprises simultaneously attend to social missions and financial goals. She spends her time continually working to better manage the paradoxes of life that we all face and writes about them in her latest book that she co-wrote with Marianne Lewis, Both and Thinking, Embracing Creative Tensions to Solve Our Toughest Problems. Ladies and gentlemen, your panel. I think what I'd like to try and do is ask one, maybe two questions of the panel and move to questions in the room and questions online. The first question is a soft question directed to everyone, and the second question is more tailored to the specialties and the questions that we've discussed prior to this session. But I'm hoping that each of you may riff on each other and have some fun, and we'll see where it goes. My first question to each of you is, I wonder if you could spend a few minutes before we begin by telling us a little bit about yourself, your work, what you're passionate about, and I'm curious what called to you to come to the Victoria Forum? What spoke to you? You're all so busy, but you said yes, so I'm curious what called to you. Senator Galvez, do you want to start?
Yes. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm so honored to be here with you today. So as Don said, I'm an environmental engineer. I have 47 years in academia. And to tell you the truth, I became frustrated at a point because environmental legislation has impacted my work for all my career. And at a point, I realized that the environmental legislation just only legalize, and attenuate pollution, but it never prevents it. And that's a horrible problem. And we know the state of the environment is a complex issue. We are overpopulation, we overconsume, technology is not clean, and of course cultural differences. But we have been, as humanity, in this conundrum already before, and we have survived because we choose to show solidarity, compassion, cooperation. And I think that we need to redress our economic system. a system where you are allowed to pollute, where you are allowed to litter, and polluter doesn't pay, even though the law says that, needs to be reviewed. And I'm confident that humans, we can do that because we created that system, so therefore we can improve it. Is that enough? Or, yeah?
That's perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Of course, always coming to Victoria, beautiful Victoria. How can I say no?
Thank you. Balgis?
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to be here. I'm really glad and honored. I'm Balgis Osman Elasha. I'm Sudanese. As the Dawn mentioned, I work for the African Development Bank, but I'm always passionate about to work with societies. And my work has always been focusing on the human dimension. The human dimension of the global environmental changes and how global environmental changes can impact the human beings, and how human beings are, through their different activities, are also impacting the environment. Maybe a little bit about my background, my family, I mean. I'm a member of a large family with 5 sisters, 5 brothers, mashallah. And this fact actually has shaped my views about the future. I mean, when I was a child, it was like we are living in a community. And the fact that you don't have a private resources, you share the space, you share the time, you share the possessions. And within my family, we have been seeing this, like the struggle to maintain the balance between having your own space, having your own personality, and also being part of a whole. And in the middle of this, you see things working through a lot of caring and sharing. And I think this is the main thing that actually that shaped my thinking, as I mentioned. Now, when I see all the problems, I think one entry for the solution is to start by caring and sharing. And I just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Wendy, do you want to?
Yeah, Don, thank you for such a great introduction, and thank you all for being here. It's an honor to be here. And I am here today perhaps because of Ben & Jerry's and Enron. I started my academic career because I was a management consultant. I was really intrigued by the social responsibility movement that was bubbling up in the 1990s. My colleagues in management consulting thought that it was very quaint, but not sustainable. And then Enron fell, which reminded us of what happens when corporations overemphasize profits at the expense of thinking about anything else. And I went to grad school to try and understand what it meant for organizations to be part of the solution, not just the problem or not the problem. And I got to grad school to explore that question. My advisor, who was brilliant and wonderful and had access to how IBM was innovating, said to me, "Why don't you study that?" And I said, "I'm not really interested in how corporations grow. I'm interested in how they're more sustainable." And he said, "Well, this social responsibility thing, you're never going to get a job if you study that." Well, 5 years later when I graduated, he said, "You know, and I studied innovation at IBM. He said to me, "You know, Wendy, that social responsibility thing, that question of how companies think about going beyond profits and being part of, get on that now. It's really, really important." So now, 20 years or so later, I am here studying that question still of how we think about the integration, or we think about the role of social environmental demands within a broader corporation. We think about bringing together competing demands, and in fact, I will go back to my roots and say I think innovation is a really big component to that solution, and that's what brings me here today. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. And great segue to Kresse.
I almost never know why I'm anywhere. But I'm definitely here because I've been coming to the University of Victoria for several years now because I see the way that Gustafsson works, and I think it's the future of business, and I think business schools have been failing us for a long time because they've been pumping out this concept that you had to make money at all costs, and actually the costs we've discovered to be too high. But why I run the business that I run is because I had a unique moment in time when I moved to the UK in 2004. I had a tiny, tiny bit of money, enough money to explore for a while if I lived on beans on toast and ran everywhere. And what I explored was the landfill sites in the UK. I explored the fact that they had produced 100 million tons of waste, which they were sending to landfill on a tiny little island. And I thought that was obscene. And I thought if I picked one bit of waste and I did something exceptional with it, maybe that would give me permission to collect other waste. The waste I discovered was fire hose, and I turned it into luxury handbags, which I didn't think was a revolutionary or crazy thing, but it really is in an industry where the vast majority of the other players, particularly the big players, call themselves wonderful, innovative, creative companies, and actually they're destroying the environment and exploiting its people. So it's a very destructive industry that hides behind a banner of creativity. And I've been challenging that for 18 years now and having so much more fun than these businesses. And I think that's fundamentally why we've succeeded, because we are designed to give, we're designed to be abundant, we're designed to be connected to our community. And all of that makes everything that we do such a joy and such a privilege. And I guess the reason why I want to talk about regenerative business and be here is because people think we have to give up so much to solve the climate crisis. Actually, we have so much to gain. I sleep at night, and I'm one of the only entrepreneurs that I know that sleeps at night. And I just want everyone else to have that same joy.
Thank you. You can see why I had such great difficulty in the green room thinking, boy, you know, we could start a whole new series of questions with such a talented group of panelists. I hope that you're thinking about their backgrounds and their skills and what they bring to this conversation, and some of the questions you might want to ask after I get through with four short ones. Can everybody hear okay? Maybe it's old ears for me, but the echo is a little disconcerting, but I think that's the size of the room and not much we can do about it. So I'm going to lean into the first question. The United Nations Secretary General has called the climate crisis a code red and says we're sleepwalking into a climate catastrophe. Others believe that any solutions to change our social reality are hopelessly out of scale to the size of the challenge. Roy Scranton and other catastrophists believe that no one is driving and that no one's going to save us. So who do you believe? And how can we navigate these diverse points of view? Balgis, you work with many of these issues every day, and because you wrote a paper of hope and why climate change is not all gloomy, I wonder if you could start this discussion.
Thank you very much for this is a very interesting question. Yeah, I see the red code is literally red. You see the expanding red list of endangered species, biodiversity, and ecosystems. You see extreme climate, temperature reaching historical records, and leading to devastating impact in terms of human lives and forest fires, and so many observed changes and impacts. This I see it as a signal or a warning call, and to show the need for action. Maybe it has a positive side, because there are, it used to be like two groups, two power driving the world. One power would like to go into the same conventional trajectory that has brought all the problems that we are facing now. The other power would like to take us to a safer planet. And with all these observed catastrophic events, I think the awareness created, and it tilted now the balance towards the power which are trying to save the world. So in a sense, you can see a blessing in disasters. Sometimes, we need to be a shock for us to act in a more responsive and more serious way. So in a sense, I see there are more commitment now towards solving the problem, especially as it hit not only the developing countries as it was supposed to be, or the projected that the developing countries and the least developed countries will be hit strongest and they will suffer more. Now we see also developed countries suffering in a similar way. We see heat waves killing people in their apartments. We see fires. We see it is like a thing that we didn't want to see, but it's a reality now. And so this. I see more tools being developed and more means of implementation being deployed. So this is why I don't see the gloomy. It's the gloomy. I see there is hope, because now what we missed before was the political commitment to act. Now more and more we see commitment, because as I mentioned, the disasters that hit everywhere is a signal for everyone to act. And it's not one person driving. Now we need everyone to be part of the process. From policymakers down to communities, everyone has a role to play in this process, starting even by changing our behavior and our attitude. And for policymakers also to give more commitment and starting from planning to implementation and making available, the previous pledges to support the process, and even adding more now. Yeah. So this is why I said it's not really gloomy. We see hope. Thank you.
You didn't seem so optimistic yesterday, but we had a quick chat.
Yeah, I told you I'm not very optimistic, but I'm not pessimistic. And I also see, more and more technologies. We can't solve, of course, the problem with technologies alone, but it is one of the tools that can definitely contribute to solving the problem. You see the renewable energy. Now, initially it was the cost which is constraining the adoption of, for example, solar and wind energies. But now the cost of wind, for example, during the last decade have declined by 3 times, and the cost of solar by 10 times. And more and more new technologies are being in place. And also we see the technology of carbon capture and storage moving from being experimental to being practiced, implemented. The awareness, as I mentioned, created. The nature-related solutions. We speak now about nature-based solutions and the conservation and the need to give more emphasis to the protection and conservation, but without threatening the livelihood of the community depending on these natural resources. So we see different, ideas, and we see also scientific thinking, which is more closer to the human part and the social aspects. It's not like the dry science now. It's more of addressing the social problems as well as environmental and economic problems. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Galvez?
Yes, I would like to complement Baggy's answer. So we are now going to COP27. And that means 27 years we've been discussing to arrive to a conclusion that unequivocally it's human activities. And for the first time last year, we started mentioning fossil fuels, because that's the cause. We are burning fossil fuels, turning in CO2, greenhouse gases. So when you analyze the situation of the state of the planet warming, is the following, is that the scientists have done their job. They have proved unequivocally the causes. And now what they are doing is attribution science to say these destructive extreme weather events are linked to planet warming. So all these dry and droughts, all this evaporation of this water will go into the atmosphere and it will drop as an atmospheric river somewhere. So that is done. I don't think we should ask more from scientists in the sense that they have done their job. Technologists and engineers have developed an incredible portfolio of renewable energy. We have solar, we have wind, we have biomass, we have, and take the hydro. We are in Canada, and our portfolio of renewable energy is poor. When you go to Europe, you see that they are doing tidal, they are doing wave, they are doing lots of kind of different scale of hydropower. And we have a coast from coast to coast and no one single project on tidal. That tells a lot. And why is that? Is because the engineers have done their job too. They have provided with technology, commercial scale, but we have to fight against the denial, the doubt, and the delay in the action. And that comes from, again, a sector or sectors that are put in conflict of interest, where, as my colleague said before, they are driven by profits, where the only indicator is the financial profit instead of the social activity and also the cost of these extreme weather events. So, for example, politicians, because we will come down to the fact that who is not doing the job? Scientists are doing their job, engineers and technologists are doing their job, sociologists are doing their job, doctors are doing their job. So who's missing in this solution scenario? Is the politician, is the financial sector, and there are the energy-intense sectors, which are denying, doubting, and delaying. So, but now we are aware. So that's a big, because your initial question is, are we optimists or we are dooming and we are, sleepwalking into the abyss? I have lots of reasons to be optimistic because I've been in this field for 47 years, never heard so many groups, so many people. Yesterday, I was talking with grannies for the environment. They are worried about their grandchildren. Who's not worried about their children and grandchildren? We have to. So they are ready to talk to whoever they have to talk in order to make this change in mentality and stop putting sectors in positions of conflict of interest. When you have directors of boards that are sitting at the same time in bank boards, in pension plans boards, in fossil fuels boards. What do you think is going to happen? You know? So they are going to take decisions that are in conflict with their other positions. So we have to eliminate these things. We have to bring the science, the climate science, the energy expertise into these boards, into these decisions. Otherwise, we are in this vicious circle where it's difficult to get out.
Thank you. We could keep riffing on that. Wendy, you looked like you were going to say something. I'm not sure. No? Okay. Let's try this question. Some think businesses will find the solutions we require for climate change. Others believe we need more government engagement and intervention. Capitalism has been criticized for many reasons throughout history. Among them are the unreliability and instability of capitalist growth, production of social harm such as pollution, and forms of inequality and income disparity. Kresse, as an entrepreneur who has a love-hate relationship for waste, I'm curious what you think about how your work tackles some of these issues. What's the role of entrepreneurs, investors, and philanthropists in advancing climate change solutions?
So in the same way that I have a love-hate relationship with waste, I think I have a love-hate relationship with capitalism too. My first job, I was working for a venture capital company. And what excited me about it, and probably why I became an entrepreneur, was that I realized if you made enough money to keep your doors open, you could do whatever you want. There's very little rules. So I want to give half my money away, no problem. I want to make handbags out of fire hoses, no problem. I want to set up a workshop in a prison, no problem. I want to pay my apprentices a obscene amount of money, no problem. All of that I can do, and because I can pay for it, nobody can tell me not to do it. The problem is that we also have entrepreneurs that think it's totally acceptable to build a rocket and go to space while not paying their employees effectively. We also have entrepreneurs that think it's fine to spend billions of pounds on a metaverse and destroy a democracy and then become a philanthropist. So none of that is fine. And this is why I think there's definitely, like Rosa said, two people not doing their jobs. I don't think it should be acceptable to make a single penny if there is public risk. If there is extraction or exploitation, you should not be able to profit from it. That should be illegal. So that's the job of policymakers. We need to change the rules around fiduciary duty. If you are exploiting people, you should be in prison. If you're destroying an ecosystem, you should be in prison. We need a carbon tax, we need it to be global, and we needed it a decade ago. But also, entrepreneurs aren't doing their jobs, because we have all of this freedom to do really exciting, wonderful things, to change the nature of supply chains, to change the way we culturally see aspiration. And I don't think it's aspirational to amass billions of pounds just so that I can give it away. I think it's much more aspirational to embed in everything that you do the idea that you only exist as part of a community, and you only exist because of all of the things that came before you and all the things that came after you, and you have to sort of take your ego out of it. And unfortunately, a lot of entrepreneurs have really big egos, and they see themselves as above things as opposed to as a part of an ecosystem. So definitely those two groups aren't doing their jobs, and I think that's crazy because we've got all the freedom to do it.
Thank you. Anyone else want to tackle that?
Yeah, just one point that it's important for the investors and like the private sector to understand that the short-term benefits will be, the cost in the future will be much, much higher than any immediate benefits. And for them to join the process of change, because for them it is cost and benefit. And the cost of not acting now will be much higher in the future. So we need to have like these entry points for different, groups. For government, we need to highlight the issue of sustainability and the fact that climate change will threaten all the development gains, the past one and the current one. Unless we integrate climate change into all new investments and projects, there would be no sustainability. And so for different categories, you need to have different entry points, maybe showing the risk or also trying to give them the incentive to be part of the process of change. Yeah.
Thank you, Balgis. Wendy?
Well, I want to add in also the perspective of what's the job of the academic in this conversation. And I think part of the job of the academic, and to my academic colleagues out there, is to help change and frame the questions that we're asking. And so I want to, first of all, congratulate the organizers of this panel, the Center for Social and Sustainable Innovation, to note the diverse perspectives on this panel and the different perspectives that we all bring: climate science, government, entrepreneurship, academia, because indeed, if we are going to focus around the question of how do we reduce the 51 billion tons of greenhouse gases and set our planet from a blaze into something that's sustainable, you need all of these perspectives, and that's the first piece. And we need to work across those different perspectives. And there are different demands or different expectations or different things that each of these different worlds are looking at and what they want to accomplish. So I sit here as an academic with with a tremendous amount of humility, being among activists in each of these sectors. As academics, we have the privilege of studying what other people do and talking about it. And so I want to just take 1 second to talk about what I think it is that other people are doing profoundly to make a difference on that 51 billion tons of greenhouse gases. And in part, what we find is that the framework or the way that people are thinking about making a difference is not one in which it's atomistic or in which individual groups are working independently, but in which we're working in this more holistic approach. And the language that we use for that is the language of paradox. And the reason that we use this kind of spicy word paradox, like if academics do anything, they label the space, right? And so if the label that we use is around this notion of paradox, the reason we use that is to acknowledge that when it comes to making change, when it comes to sort of living in a more holistic way, we've got to understand that there are competing demands that often fight for things, resources at the local level, and yet, in order for us to move forward, we have to think about what's unique, distinct in those competing approaches in order to, in service of thinking of a more holistic, integrative possibility. And the language of paradox, the reason we use that is because we note, as we've seen in organizations, that those kinds of tensions never go away. It's about constantly living in and navigating them. So if you're an entrepreneur seeking to make a difference on climate change or seeking to make a difference on waste, in order to be able to do that, you're also noting that you have to be able to pay your bills. So how do you live in that? How do you change the question to ask, how can we pay our bills through the possibility of reducing waste, rather than thinking about these as opposing, but really thinking about the integrative demands between them. So in part, the invitation for us, in thinking about this space, is to continue to look out toward the question of how do we remove the 51 plus billion tons of greenhouse gas that we put out into the world by noticing the ongoing tensions that we experience about it and living in and navigating those tensions collectively. I guess, Don, if I were to say one more word about that in the context of this conference, if we're bridging divides, what we have to be able to do in our conversations is notice those divides, notice what's different, notice what's distinct in service of enabling the bridges, and we have to pull apart in service of connecting with one another.
You bumped into my next question, which is perfect. I wanted to talk about your book a bit, but I guess somewhere along the way, either or became a dominant cognitive paradigm. So using what you know and what you teach, is it possible to bridge the many divides that exist in the world, such as race, gender, culture, politics, and climate? How do we learn to speak to individuals in communities from different backgrounds and build those bridges that we need to build?
Well, I can start with that. We tend to pull things apart and either or them, and what we mean by that is that we look to a linear, rational approach. We look at dividing tensions and take a side. Am I going to focus on climate action, or am I going to be committed to a system of capitalism, a business-oriented? We tend to pull them apart and pick one because it's more comfortable, because it's easier, and in the short term, it makes change easier to address, but in the long term, it's detrimental. But the reason that we do that is because just as human beings, it's more comfortable. There's a lot of anxiety that we feel in the uncertainty of trying to put things together. So the invitation is to see the possibility in the holistic, integrative approach over the long term, and have the courage to stand into the uncertainty, to live in the, as we would say, find comfort in that discomfort, to own that discomfort of the long-term possibility, to have patience. As I told Don before, I talk about this, but I'm one of the most impatient people, so it's hard for me to live it. But there's courage, there's need to be uncomfortable, and to have patience for the long term. Well, I'll just say that when it comes to climate, it doesn't feel like we have time to be patient, and yet, if we're going to get to a better solution, we need to be having the patience to have the conversation with people who really are sitting with very different perspectives. If we're talking about bridging divides, one provocative question is, who's not in the room with us today in which we need to be bridging those divides to move forward on climate change? And do we have the courage to be able to be in conversation with people who have a very different perspective from us on climate change, and listen to their point of view, even as it might be completely opposing and potentially, not just challenging, but detrimental to us? And how do we have those conversations?
So I have to ask, a David White question. What's a beautiful question to you? What does a beautiful question look like? What does it do? Yeah.
Well, Don, I have a hammer. My hammer is both and. So my beautiful question is always when I hear in my head, it's a bit of a professional hazard, when I hear somebody present an either or, my beautiful question is always to shift should we do this or this, should we focus on this or this, is to shift the question to how can we accommodate both A and B, both and my favorite person to quote on this one is Paul Watzlawick. He was a psychoanalyst, and he said, "The problem is not the problem is the way that we think about the problem." So if we can change the question to ask, how can we bring together the scientists and the politicians and the, God forbid I say this in a business, the capitalist, into conversation toward this joint goal of reducing the 51 tons of greenhouse gases to reducing the 100+ tons of waste in the UK. How could we bring ourselves together around that question and accommodate these different perspectives? I think we get to it opens up the possibility for better and more creative solution space.
Beautiful, thank you. My last question, although there are more, but hopefully we'll go to the audience and go online. Perhaps the most significant challenge posed by global warming is that any strategy that could curb its most devastating effects would require fundamental shifts at all levels of social existence and governance. Many complications arise with serious and, to date, unresolvable contradictions between demands for environmental protection and climate justice. Rosa, as an academic, researcher, and senator, can you talk to us about how you navigate these various contradictions and tensions?
Yes, I very much agree with what has been said about bringing people together and don't fall into this or the other. So the big question is, who's going to pay to save humanity? Okay, that's the big question. And actually, there is a very logical answer, which is everybody. We should do our own effort, but with respect to or following a fair share contribution. Now, while some people will think that, oh, what is fair share and how we determine, it's a complex answer, there are several key factors that are evident to everybody. So first is the historical emissions. So we, as developed country, we have put in the atmosphere many more tons of CO2 because we have been developed for many more years compared with the developing country. So that's one. So for sure, we have to help the developing countries in decarbonizing their economies. But the other is, at present, if you prefer to take a picture instead of a film, because I always say history is a film, and we can go backwards and see historically how much we have put damage in the atmosphere. But if you prefer to take a picture and you will prefer to say, well, today is China, United States, Brazil, India, because of the population they have, that they are putting more CO2. But, okay, then let's make an inventory of this. And actually, United Nations has come with an incredible description of how to do this. You know, we have to disclose our emissions. The industries have to disclose their, I don't want to get technical, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, which means all the emissions that I put in the atmospheres, in my value chain, and downstream. So everything has to be there in order to pay for these emissions that I have put in there. And I think also it's very evident for people now to say, there are some politicians and there are some climate delaying actors that are saying, oh, but it's too costly, it costs too much to take out this CO2. But changing the question is, how much is costing us now the CO2 that is there? Because these extreme weather events are now costing billions every time it happens. And financial institutions are in this conundrum because in one side, they are scared of these transition changes and these physical changes and the stranded assets and all this insurance that cannot keep paying all this extreme weather event destruction, but at the same time, they keep investing in fossil fuel. So I think what we need to do as politicians, academics, at this point, is to put light on these issues. So like these issues are known by everybody. So like you, me, and everybody can go to our bank and say, where is my money being invested? Why are you putting us in this situation? Are you thinking in the long-term benefits, or you're just thinking in today? So for sure, we are in complex and difficult situations. But to tell you the truth, and to come back to the fact of being positive, is that less and less there are climate change deniers, less and less. Or if they are quiet in their corner. Nobody dares to say, you know, it's because the evidence is overwhelming. So now we are at that phase. How are we going to pay for this? How and who should pay? And who should have the leadership on these actions? And it has to be national or international levels, because the atmosphere doesn't have borders. So we cannot bring it. Yes, municipalities for sure, they are the one in the first line when an extreme weather event happens. They are the one that loses the infrastructure, for sure, yes. But the decision about how to distribute the efforts in reducing the greenhouse gases has to be at a higher level.
Thank you. Kresse, you grabbed your microphone. Did you want to?
I think I just want to give a sort of concrete example, is that we sometimes think that having this really complicated challenge is going to result in people having to give up lots of things. People talk about reducing your footprint, and actually I think that we have a real opportunity to reframe the question and say, how can we maximize our footprint? You know, we have the fact that we've got a climate crisis is a contributing factor to the reality in the UK right now that we have more young people on antidepressants than at any time in history. If we have a challenge that we're all tasked with, if we say we don't have just rights, we have rights and responsibilities, and we can all contribute to this unbelievable shift, not just in greater equality and climate justice and a recharge in revamp in bringing back the biodiversity that we've lost. We're also going to solve mental health issues. We're also going to bring a lot of people into the economy that are not considered economic actors. It's going to be more pleasant. It's going to be more fun. You know, we have to stop thinking of some of these things like a pie and there's only so many pieces. It's not a pie. We can have all the pies we want. We just have to be creative in what kind of pie it is. And maybe the pie where everybody drives an SUV and takes Prozac is not a great pie.
Balgis?
Yeah, just briefly. Yeah, I'm glad that we move now more towards the solution space. Because before, when we speak about climate change, we mainly argument around the problem. But now, you can see even globally, there is more debate on the solutions and what's working, what's not working, and how to accelerate this, the deployment of these solutions. And in this process, I think it's important to think about winners, that everyone should be part of the winners. We don't want to see losers, because some of these solutions may also have a negative impact on the other groups. If we speak about afforestation efforts or reforestation, and the fact that there are communities who are 100% dependent on forests, so on biodiversity. So like monocropping could be a problem for them. Protecting the forest for the whole purpose of carbon sequestration could also deprive them from their livelihoods. Bioenergy could also threaten the food security of certain groups. So we need also to take on board those people. We need to be very inclusive in this solution space, not to leave anyone behind, because issues of equity are now coming, more and more in relation to all the solutions related to mitigation as well as on adaptation. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a couple of days' worth of questions to ask each of these panelists, but I would rather that we look to the audience and look online to see what questions we might have. I'm not sure how that will be organized. I can't see if anybody's at the microphones. We're here. There's a question. So we need to we found a microphone. Perfect. Thank you.
Hi, sorry. First, I want to remind the moderator to maybe repeat the questions for the people online.
Can you hold your microphone a bit closer?
No, I got it. Yeah, I just want to remind the moderator to repeat the question so that the people online can actually hear it. So my question is that one of the issues that has come up for communities where the local economy has been focused on resource extraction surrounds jobs. And the populist attitude has been, well, we've been coal miners for generations. Why are you taking this industry away from us now? The traditional solution that's been implemented is to say something like, oh, we'll do job retraining and help you find work and help you work with newer technologies, but there doesn't seem to be much trust generated by that kind of solution. And so where and how can public administration, community, and nonprofits aid in regaining that community trust to help actually put forward the real solutions that will work for that community that you hear about by listening to what the community thinks they need?
Thank you. Anyone want to tackle that?
Well, I can try
Okay.
some elements. Of course, in this race and in this process to a low carbon economy, knowledge economy, of course there is going to be transformations. And there are sectors that will be more affected than others, and we have to work in a just transition and inclusion for workers and trainings. That's why the educational and the skill upgrade and is so central to any movement in this direction, and that's why it has to be a holistic and not a tunnel vision. We have to think about not leaving nobody behind, and this will be through a just transition in which everybody is implicated. And in that sense, you know, I have talked, for example, with small communities. In my province of Quebec, there are some small cities that has been developed around a mining. So what are they going to do? And so we have to think in, even though mining is not sustainable per se, we have to think in beyond the lifetime of the mining. And the mine has to think about the community. What are they, in rendering the building capacity and making them resilient, so when they are gone, there is still activity of different nature in that community. And with respect, for example, with the fossil fuel workers, I have talked with unions with them, and they have told me, I'm a welder, I'm an electrician. Whether it is to work in a oil well or it's in a wind turbine, is the same. So I think that we have to take out those barriers, and we have to think more holistically and at long term and in sustainable terms. I hope some elements of answer are there. Thank you.
Well, I'd also add, right, the question is how do organizations help communities in which the main resource of extraction both is no longer available and or is not really enabling of environmental possibilities or is detrimental to the environment. How do organizations help? And here I would like to suggest that there is, and I'll just take a step back and say this is drawing on some of the research that I've done with Natalie Slowinski here at the University of Victoria, back in Newfoundland, or exploring organizations in Newfoundland about community redevelopment, and maybe challenge the question a bit, because community redevelopment requires both a commitment from community members and their own self-determination to advance their community, even as it values and benefits from outsiders who enable and bring in resources. And one of those resources, by the way, is new ideas when you've been living in a community and potentially a community that's depressed and continually being depressed. So there is this tension. If I were to draw on my own sort of mental space as an academic looking at organizing, there's this tension in the organizing of the value that the outsider brings, the organizations, and the value that the insider brings who's living it in reality. And I think that part of the organizing that we've seen back in Newfoundland of communities that were engaged in community redevelopment to overcome the limited fisheries and cod that were available. The organizing happens by bringing together the insiders and the outsiders. Now, that's not easy to do. That is really hard work because there's, again, differing perspectives, and that's the courageous hard work, I think, of organizing to enable to enable a better solution.
Great question. Thank you very much. Did you have more? No. Anyone else? Yes.
Hello. You spoke about capitalism, and you spoke about how, as a successful capitalist, there's an incredible amount of freedom and sort of power that comes with that to make change. My question is, given the issues of really, conflict of interest, the sort of ego, individualist ego, and trying to get people on board with a just transition, would that not all be made easier if a more democratic economy was brought in to the economic sphere, whereby everyone could have that power shared more equally amongst each other? Thank you.
Thank you. Kresse, do you want to try it?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting idea, and of course I agree, because we have had rising inequality in most countries since the 1970s, which means there are less people with economic power, there are less people who have the opportunities that I've had to set up a business, and there are less people who have the capital to invest in businesses and therefore, benefit. So when you have, and this kind of could solve the community problem too, is that we don't often see all of our assets as shared. I grew up in Edmonton in the 1980s. I benefited from an unbelievable education. That was me benefiting from a shared asset within society. And I don't think when large extractive industries go into a place and set up a mine that they think of the 40-year program to reinvest in that community. And they're not often taxed that way. So yes, I am a capitalist, but I think a lot of people wouldn't consider me a successful one because I self-tax. Elvis and I every year have a tax party where we celebrate how much money we give away and how much money we give to the government, and we pretend that Boris Johnson hasn't spent it on something ridiculous, and that actually it's being spent on something good and wonderful. But I think that actually tax needs to be higher. I think financial transactions need to be taxed. I think jet fuel needs to be taxed. I think that would change the paradigm in capitalism, because it is too lopsided. It is, I was talking to someone earlier this morning, it is corrupt. And in order to bring that back into some sort of ecosystem, we have to change the rules, because the monopoly system that we've got the cards are stacked against far too many people. And I think one of the most interesting, there's a new venture capital business that's set up in London, and the premise of this whole VC, the question they asked was, what if the person who has the cure for cancer in their brain is a 16-year-old refugee and has no access to education, no access to funds? We need to completely change how capital flows if we want to have a flourishing environment, and to bring in the word democracy there, and the true impulse behind it is actually the correct word, I think.
I just want to add to that, and perhaps provide. I think that problem may not be capitalism, the problem may be scale. The assumption is that capitalism can grow without any constraints. And that may be a problem of regulation, and tax is one way to constrain, to minimize. But I wonder if it's not the system of being able to grow new ideas and develop them, but rather the expectation and the norm that we have that if you're going to grow new ideas, they have to scale to such a great degree and then become outsized in terms of the power that they have over defining possibilities. But also, as we grow to such a great extent, we no longer can see the possibilities for integration at a local level. And I wonder if scale is one of our biggest problems, and our solutions come from political space where we regulate, taxes where we regulate and we minimize the possibility of scale, and maybe our sociology around how we think about size.
Rosa?
Yes, I would like to add that, in every country, and when we compare economies in the world, we use this GDP, which is an indicator of only one type of benefits, which is the financial. And we disregard all the other positive impacts, and we don't integrate that in that, and we use this parameter to compare us. I think that physically it's impossible to reconcile infinite growth, economic growth, as per GDP, with a finite planet as the Earth. It's incompatible. I know that some economists are saying what we need to do is decouple the growth from the emissions. And some people, like for example, UK, for example, has succeeded in doing this. So they are still growing, but a very much slow rate from their emissions. And bravo for them. But I think until we don't realize what these scientists, Rayward told us, that economy should develop in a donut, where the floor is the social needs that we all want: access to justice, democracy, health, food, water, clean air. So that's the floor, but the ceiling is the planetary limits. So we have finite resources that we cannot go beyond, because otherwise we don't leave this for the next generations, and we are not doing it the right way. So, but this donut in which we can develop, it's large, and all innovations and all creativity and all new technologies should be developed in this donut between what the basics that everybody human being needs and the limits of our planet. And the 9 limits of our planet, of course, has to do with climate change, has to do with ocean acidification, has to do with biodiversity and extinction and excess nutrients and all of this. So the science is there. Again, I come back to what I said initially, is that scientists have done their job, have exposed all of that. Now, what we need is the implementation and the communication and putting lights where there are these conflicts. And for example, just one last thing to say. We talk about free market. And free market is, a indicator of health of capitalism. But if we give subsidies and we keep subsidizing the fossil fuel, how can we say that's free market? That's not free market. So there are these incoherences that needs to be put in the light so we can solve these issues. And we are not talking about here, I come from Peru, so I have lived military governments from extreme right and military government from extreme left. And let me tell you that when the extreme left is there, private property doesn't exist. So nobody here is going to go into that direction. We are still in capitalism, but we have to review the indicators of our wealth. We have to give value to the ecological services that the planet provides to us. And yeah, thank you.
Don, I just want to add one more idea to this, which is the notion that we see, and we see this in psychology, we see this in experiments and research, that boundaries, boundedness, limitations enables creativity. And so the assumption, the capitalistic assumption of having limited boundedness in order to expand and create is actually a problematic assumption. But rather, if we create a ceiling, boundaries within which people have to be creative in their economic ventures, we enable more possibility and more creativity. And that would translate into what it means for government to create the possibilities for small self-determination with individual communities to create what's needed and bring out the wisdom in those communities for what's necessary locally. It's the conversation we started last night. And so I wonder what it, again, if we're talking about, I don't think it's about, in my opinion, tearing down the capitalistic systems. I think it's about how we, as a society, how we politically create the boundaries so that people can be creative, but within their self-sustaining communities and enable more possibility.
Okay.
Just
But
one
just
sentence. Yeah,
No.
I put it as we, in all our decisions, we need to aim at striking this delicate balance between our needs and aspirations and the capacity of the ecosystems. Yeah, just.
Thank you. I'd like to keep this discussion going for another day or two, but obviously we're almost out of time. And I would urge, if you have questions, to please check our panelists' bios and search them out. Also, I believe the university will take your questions and forward them to our panelists. It has been an honor and a joy to work with each of you. I'm delighted, and I have so many more questions to ask. I will track you down throughout the next couple of days. Before we go away, I wanted to introduce Natalie Slowinski, who has been the champion for this panel that brought us all together. She's kept us from going off the ledge a number of times, and has been a real spirit in bringing us all together. So I'd like to introduce her wherever she may be. Natalie, are you nearby?
Thanks, Don. Thank you. Oh, you want me to say something? I do want you to say something. Don, you put me on the spot. Thank you all for coming today, for sharing all of your vast expertise and insights with us. I feel so inspired. I feel troubled that we have solutions and we're not implementing them, but I feel hopeful because I know that all of you, each of you, is enacting solutions and inspiring and role modeling for others what can be done. So thank you so much. I am so grateful. Thank you. And I have a small gift for each of you.
This is Wendy's book. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate it. Hopefully we'll talk more online. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Don. Thank you to the panelists. This has been a great exchange. Somebody pointed out at one point that the economic, the social, and the environmental are all interconnected. I think this panel really demonstrated it. This said, after the break at 11:20, we will have another plenary focused on the economy, but I'm sure we'll also touch on the social and the environmental. Merci beaucoup. Je vous invite à prendre une pause de 30 minutes. On se retrouve à 11h20 précise pour le prochain panel, la prochaine plénière avec un focus sur l'économie. Merci.